to Marquette Now. I'm Amelia Jones, and this week on Down to the Wire, Rebecca Carballo is with us to discuss her story about lead pipe concerns that could affect students across campus on and off campus housing. Sorry, that was a jumble. Thank you for joining me, Rebecca. So to start off, I want to talk to you a little bit about how did you find this topic? Like, who told the Wire about it, or who told you about it in order to write the story?
I actually just found out about it just keeping up with the news. I read about it in the JS. It's a citywide problem, and it's not unique to Milwaukee. Chicago's had similar problems. Cities with older infrastructure kind of tend to run into this.
Interesting. And so in your report, you wrote that there are 123 properties on Marquette's campus who have these lead pipe services. And you also wrote that academic buildings and residence halls were tested for these lead pipes. Were these other properties that are off campus but still house Marquette students, were they tested as well?
So for the academic buildings and the apartments, they were, the campus-owned apartments, so like Campus Town East and Campus Town West, the water was tested for lead, and they all had either the safe EPA standard levels, so like okay to drink, and that's because those are all university-owned buildings, so the university is liable for that. So the other off-campus properties don't necessarily have to be tested by the university, so that is up to the owner of the property. So it's at a property-by-property case.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then how exactly would a student who lives in off-campus housing, like myself, and do you live off-campus?
I do.
Okay, so like ourselves, how would we know if our water was affected with lead or had lead in it?
Well, it's difficult to say if the water itself is affected with lead, but you can look up if you have a lead service line. So you or I could go to the city who has a database online, or go to the Marquette Wire. We have the list published on our website, and we can look up our addresses, and mine's actually on the list. So
shoot.
Right? So you could see that way if you have a lead service line, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have lead in your water, and this gets a little tricky. So basically, there's a coating on the inside of the pipe, and that protects the water from the lead, but if that pipe was to be disrupted or breached somehow, lead could leach in the water, and there's really no way of knowing how much lead will reach in the water or when that would happen. Sorry if that wasn't a comforting answer.
No, it was. And actually, I used the database, and I looked up my own address, and I do not have a lead service pipe, so that's good. But I also know that my building is kind of one of the newer apartment buildings on campus. But like you said, so the database is online on the Wire. And then actually in one of the academic buildings, your report you wrote that they actually took away a water fountain from Straz because it did come back with an EPA level that was not acceptable, correct?
Yeah, that was in the administrative side of the building, though.
Okay.
And that came out with too high of levels of lead, but they took it out right away, and that test was conducted over the summer, and it was published. The report came out in August, so all before we were back on campus.
Makes sense. And you also wrote in your report that it is the responsibility of the landlord. So like you said, it's sort of a property-by-property basis to replace it. And how much, if you can just say, I don't know if you stated it in your report or not, how much does it cost roughly to replace these pipes?
Roughly, it's about $6,000 a piece. So if the city were, for the entire city of Milwaukee, the 70,000 pipes that need to be replaced, it would be like half a billion dollars, excuse me. So that's why there's kind of a holdup, is just because it's hard to come up with that amount of money in a short time, and just the logistics of this all.
Right, but Milwaukee is planning on replacing some of these pipes. I believe in your report you wrote that Mayor Tom Barrett hopes to replace at least 800 of them?
That's correct.
Okay, and are these 123 properties part of that 800, or are they not included?
So the properties the city is tackling first are higher risk areas, so areas like daycares and places with a lot of children or mothers who are nursing, because the effects of lead are a lot of developmental problems. So that's things that affect kids a lot. So if you're living in an area with a bunch of children, or you're a daycare or school, that property's going to be taken care of first. If you have an emergency breakage or leak or something, then that's going to be taken care of first. So I imagine that student housing might not be on the top of that list.
Okay, so if it's not on the top of the list, then what can students do if they are worried about this? Like, say they look up the database and they see their address on the list, do you recommend maybe that they get a filter? Or do they let it go? Or what would you advise?
Yeah, I mean, anyone can get a filter. You can get one at the hardware store. You know, I'm sure if you called up your landlord, maybe they would install it for you. So I think the filter is probably the best way to go.
And what exactly? Sorry, I'm not familiar with water filters. It would just go on your like sink.
Yeah, there's some that are like that, or like even just like, if you really want, you could get a Brita. I mean, I don't know. It's either way, just some type of filtration device.
And are you going to be updating and keeping up with the story?
Yeah, I definitely plan on following it, and then just kind of I want to keep my ear to the ground, see if any students, you know, do look into replacing it, because I think before I read the JS story, I never thought, oh, does my property have a service line? So I'm kind of hoping that this makes people on campus more aware. And I would encourage people to like look up their address on the actual database, because we just took a sample size. I looked at just a sample of areas that were concentrated in campus.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Rebecca, again for joining me. I really appreciate it. And if you want to read the rest of her investigative story, please visit marquettewire.org. That's all I have for Down to the Wire. We will see you next week on Marquette Now. Have a great week, Marquette.